our dear participants. It's a great pleasure for me to be today with you. And actually, it's our new format of our CSR breakfast, because usually we met offline, but there were a lot of requests from people because we are everywhere now, a lot of Ukrainians everywhere, with the request to organize something online. And I think that we are going to mix it. So some breakfast will be online and some breakfast in the future will be offline. And today we decided to make it online and to talk about all EU directives regarding sustainability, because just recently on the 1st of June, a new corporate sustainability due diligence directive was adopted, and actually it's also quite a big step forward from the European Commission. And I think that the most important thing is to look what companies in EU think about these directives and what we could do as non-EU, still non-EU, but we hope that very soon we will be in the EU. So what we can do. So it will be one of the topic of our CSR breakfast. And I'm really very, very happy that very good friend of ours, of our organization, CSR Sweden, Maryna Bogle, she helped us a lot, and she found another wonderful speaker, as Natalia said. It's I should read it. Jakob Rehme, Professor Industrial Economics and Management of the Center for Business Model Innovation, and also Jakob is in CSR Sweden Knowledge Hub reporting. I think you are doing this hub together with CSR Sweden. And by the way, Jakob, perhaps you do not know that perhaps, and this is a kind of new information, that very soon we are going to have a pilot project together with CSR Sweden on responsible taxation. So it will be soon, but also today is a very important day for us. Today is our Constitution Day in Ukraine, and I think it's again every day is a new sign that we believe in our armed forces, and it's a new hope for the victory. So let's go. And I think that after this victory, we for sure will be in the EU, and that's why this topic is very, very critical and important for us. So Jakob, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here this morning, and it's fantastic to meet you. And I must agree with all what you're saying. You know, that's also my ambition. And I also know about the project that we're starting together with CSR Sweden about taxation. So that's a really good, I think, effort and a project. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I hope you see the right. Let me see here now. Can you see my? You see the entire screen now, so you don't see some. This is always a problem when we're doing it online, that we have. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Etc.
Yes, Jakob, but we have a plan B in case, because I have your presentation. And yes, actually, my big request to all our participants, if you could turn on your video, because let's make it in the format of CSR breakfast, because we really would like to see you, to see your emotions and your questions. And just to explain, Jakob will present the holistic picture, and also what Swedish companies are doing, or perhaps European companies are doing. I know that CSR Sweden just recently have organized several dialogues with companies regarding directives. So you are fully equipped with this knowledge, and you could share it with us. And then we are going to talk about directives and what we should expect from them and what we should do in preparation. So Jakob, thank you, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, as Maryna said, I'm Jakob Rehme, and I'm a professor from Sweden, Linköping. That's the city's name, and I will talk about some of the things that we can see from a Swedish perspective and from a European perspective in terms of the new sustainability directives And as Maryna said, I will focus more on the directives that are strictly towards the companies, and especially towards the new legislation when it comes to reporting and when it comes to compliance, I think. Okay, so I think that that sets the stage a bit, and this is, I mean, like a very important arena, and it's a very important aspect and a topic that I'm working quite a bit about, and I'm also a director for a Center for Business Model Innovation, and one of the basics here is that companies need to restructure their business models in order to become more sustainable, and that's one of the big pushes and one of the big issues for companies to actually try to accomplish that. And as part of this I'm also part of CSR Sweden, and I've been working quite a bit with Marianne Bogle, who is Maryna's equivalent in Sweden. So without that, I would have some ideas about why is this important? You know, why is this important for companies? You know, and this is some of the important starting points why companies really should be sustainable. And I mean, when we have been looking at this for quite some time, both in academia but also together with companies, is that there are a number of benefits from being sustainable. And the first one, which is one of the things that I will predominantly talk about here, is it's compliance and legitimacy. You need to be compliant with the legislation, but you also need to be legitimate in the eyes of the public or you know, your customers, but also your employees and society at large. So that's one of the, you know, really big benefits to behave in a good way. But there are also other reasons why a company should be sustainable, and you know, it's, you know, you can have like an external orientation. You need to protect the natural resources that you are dependent on, and I mean, most of our companies are dependent on some kind of natural resource in order to be able to produce their products or to be able to be on the market in total. There's also something, and that's also something that we could say about, you know, CSR and another thing that's something that we want almost companies or people to be, and that is to have like a ethical or moral orientation. It is good for society, and it's the right thing to do to be sustainable. So it's to become the good company, which is related to a legitimate perspective. And the last one is basically you can see sustainability also as a competitive advantage. If you're sustainable, there are also a business case that you can talk about. And you know, this is something that is growing in importance, you know, in terms of being the good companies is also something that could actually be a business case for companies. This is something that have been talked about for a very long time. Why should you be sustainable? Is there a business case for it? Does it only provide us with cost, but nothing other than that? But we can see more and more that it actually can create market opportunities, and we see this from that you can for revenue generation, etc. But it could also lead to new products. It could lead to new process development, and we see this, for instance, in steel making in Sweden, where they've gone as a big push towards CO2-free steel, and to produce this in a completely different way. So it's both in terms of the product that's supposed to be CO2-free, and also it's very much related to a process development. And this type of new value offerings is also a way to maybe get into new customers and also talk to completely new decision makers on your market. So you basically go from selling maybe to a purchaser towards selling to the customer's board of directors instead. So we can see that the business case for being sustainable is something that's increasing, and your brand value increase, and that is something that is really vital for firm survival. But the thing we're going to talk about today is very much about the compliance legitimacy and what's happening right now in the EU when it comes to legislation and directives. And there's a flurry. There's so many different new words. There's so many abbreviations, 3-letter abbreviations, TLAs, but also 4- and 5-letter abbreviations. So it's almost difficult to navigate in this. For me, it's almost impossible, and it also almost creates new languages, and that's also something that excludes other people. So we're talking about CSRD, CSDDD, ESRS, GRI, and for sustainability professionals, you get to know this. But if we want to include other persons in our companies or in the society, we also need to be more open in terms of what this actually means. So this is something that's happening, and this is something that has happened. And I would like to go through a few of these new legislations now. From a Swedish perspective, one of the first and one of the push in terms of reporting was the Global Reporting Initiative. And we had our government went in 2008 to say that all government companies should report according to the Global Reporting Initiative. And this is something that has become almost like a standard for a lot of Swedish companies. And there's a lot of Swedish and international, I mean, like globally, there's quite a number of companies that are using GRI as their basis for how to report their sustainability work in their annual reports and their sustainability reports. So the Global Reporting Initiative is something that has been quite important for the Swedish way of looking at how we are supposed to report what the sustainability work that we are doing. We also had the EU directive that's called the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. And this is predominantly for larger companies. And this is also something that's still there, but it's been replaced by the other abbreviations soon now. One thing about that was basically, especially from a sustainability perspective, we didn't really like the terminology in terms of non-financial reporting directive, because it also sounded like then it's not important because it's non-financial. But that's how the legislation when directives coming out of the EU at the time. And then we also had the SDGs, the global goals from the UN, Sustainability Development Goals. And this has also provided both legislators and companies with the common type of language in terms of working with the 17 goals for the world. But continuing from this, and one of the issues that was the starting point, or the big goal and the big aim for EU was the Green Deal. And the Green Deal is basically it was set in 2020, and it's basically a climate aim for 2050 in terms of carbon and carbon emissions. And it's also a financing vehicle. It's actually a program which is basically using also funds that is used for like Horizon Europe and Invest EU. And it's basically saying that we should finance also good projects. It could be research, it could be basic research, but it could also be specific Invest EU type of projects that you could apply for in terms of redoing new processes for your production, etc. It needs then also to follow these types of aims, and it's also a way to get more of climate action type of projects up and running, because sometimes that could be really tricky for individual companies. This is also a big opportunity for a lot of companies, but this is the basic aim, the basic goal that is set for the EU. On top of that, a much debated, I would say, that was connected to the Green Deal is the EU taxonomy. And this is politically negotiated, but it's basically a green classification framework. So what is seen as good and what is seen as not good. And in terms of this, there's always different types of opinions. The goal for the EU was to make it as scientific as possible, but there are always a certain element of politics, even in research, I would say, as a researcher. So there has been some kind of negotiations in terms of what is defined as being green or not. But these two, the Green Deal and the EU taxonomy, is the thing that sets the that could actually see that that's basically the groundwork for all the subsequent deals and goals for different member states, but it's also a way to move forward. So this is the goal, the aim of the EU, the Green Deal and the EU taxonomy. And the first one here, you know, that we have had a lot of discussion about is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So it's basically this is something that is taking away NFRD, non-financial reporting directive, and instead defining it as Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And the CSRD, which was basically decided in 22, and it's also supposed to be implemented among companies between 2024 and 2028. And the long lead times here is basically in order to make different types of companies have time to actually accommodate the directive. So for larger companies that were formerly included in the non-financial reporting directive, it needs to be 2025, whereas for the year 2025, although it's in effect in 2024. But for smaller companies, the latest stage is basically 2028. This type of directive there is also a number of prerequisites in order to, because what politicians normally say is that this should not be a burden for smaller companies. So let's put it on the larger companies because they have got the staff, they've got the resources in order to actually fulfill those types of directives and legislation. So what it means is basically you need to have like a turnover above 40 million euros or assets of 20 million euros or 250 or more employees. But it's also directed towards listed small SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. And it's also a burden towards non-EU companies that are operating in the EU, within the EU, with a turnover above 150 million euros. So it's quite a number of companies that are supposed to be included in this directive, and I will go through a bit more about what that means. But we also have the human rights and environmental due diligence, which is also something, because a lot of the EU taxonomy and the Green Deal, etc., is very much geared towards environmental protection and for climate action. But in terms of this, they also wanted legislation in terms of more human rights and workers' rights, etc. And this is the first set out on that was basically the human rights and environmental due diligence. One thing also is that if you're looking at CSRD, it was more geared towards what you are doing, whereas the human rights and environmental due diligence is also more inclusive in terms of how your entire value chain is working. So there's slight differences in terms of that. So the focus on CSRD is your own responsibility when it comes to human rights and environmental due diligence was more geared towards your supply chain or your value chain. And so the more on abbreviation is basically ESRS, which is basically a European sustainability reporting standard. So if you're looking at GRI, which have been a lot of the standardization in terms of how companies have been reporting, the ESRS is supposed to be how European companies and in compliance with CSRD should report. But then there is always different discussions in terms of this. Does that mean that this is the GRI is something else, or is it basically, if we're working with GRI, is it ESRS as well? But the thing about this CSRD and the standardization of reporting, it's basically a number of different aspects that should be included in this. So I mean, like, one thing is that it should align with the EU taxonomy. Another aspect is that you need to describe the double materiality. That is how your business model is impacting society and the environment, and how the environment and the society sustainability issues is impacting your business model. It explicates that you're supposed to have a stakeholder dialogue, and it also defines that you should have some kind of scope 3 value chain description, which is a big issue for a lot of companies. And please feel free to ask any questions, but scope 3 is basically, you know, the responsibility in terms of CO2 emissions outside of your own company. So you need to be aware of what's happening in your entire value chain. So what we could say is that we did some measurements here, and when it comes to these directives, we can see that somewhere around 2% of Swedish companies are well aligned in terms of CSRD, that they are on top of things, that they feel comfortable about this, because this is a new way, this is a new directive, and people are not really geared towards all this, and it's a big framework. So it's a lot of work that has to be done still, and but this is how it looks now. The human rights and environmental due diligence has been replaced, you can say, with CSDDD, or Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It's almost difficult to say. And this is basically, as I said earlier, it's a complement to CSRD and EU standardized framework. This is basically how you're supposed to define your due diligence. That due diligence in terms of your value chain, your supply chain, needs to be in your policies. You need to identify problems in your production and in your supply chain, and try to prevent and mitigate these problems when it comes to human rights, but also environmental issues. And this also needs to be publicly communicated towards the public. This due diligence that you're working on. I'm talking too much, I think. But this is the framework for companies. that has to, so people have to work on this. On top of this, and I think that, and I hope that Maryna will get into this a bit later on as well, there are a number of country binding agreements on emissions, on biodiversity, and a lot of different issues in terms of this, which also will fall on a lot of the companies, but they are on a country level, and it's a country binding agreement where the country government basically signs an agreement with the EU that we are on board in terms of this. Okay, so I will hurry up a bit, right, Maryna?
That's okay. That's okay. And then we will have already some questions, but I will ask afterwards. So it's very interesting. So please, because you are just putting the setting. Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the issues here is that companies need to understand the double materiality, basically how your business model is impacted by sustainability and how sustainability impacts your business model, which is quite interesting that you have that in the legislation, but there is no really common agreement what the business model actually is. This is how we define business models, and it's basically, we're working on it in terms of 3 different issues. What are you offering? What are you offering that creates value? And how this offering is constructed? Is it part of, is it services? Is it, how is your, so is it products and services? It's only services. And what is it that creates value for your customers? The other part is basically, how are you producing this value? So if we have this value offering towards the customers and or for the market, are you looking at this in terms of how is this produced in terms of your ecosystem? How is your supply chain geared towards this? But also, how is your customers involved in this type of value creation? And the third one is, well, which normally is set basically, how do you make money from this? But basically, how we are when we're talking about sustainability, we have opened up that debate a bit more and saying that how are we sharing this value in the ecosystem? How are we sharing it between different partners in the supply chain, or how what type of portion of that value are we claiming for ourselves? And in terms of sustainability, we can see there's a number of different aspects when it comes to the value offering. Is it circular? Is product as service? Do we take care of the product end of life? Is it CO2 free? When it comes to value creation, which is something that us in sustainability have worked quite a bit about, it's about monitoring and controlling a supply chain. It's also a matter of how we're responsible for our own production and what we're doing there, both in terms of social inclusion, but also environmental issues. And this could also have impact on value chain inclusion in terms of your own value production. And one particularly important aspect in terms of sustainability is then transparency of your value chain. And then value sharing. Are we opening up our value share towards down and upstream actors, but also to other stakeholders? It could be governments, NGOs, etc., labor unions, maybe even. What we are seeing in Sweden is basically, when it comes to this, you can say that in terms of the bottom hand pyramid here, when it comes to value creation, if you have a resource-driven starting point, normally all the companies that have started, that has got operations, they've got the resources as a starting point, and they're predominantly working on that. When it comes to purpose-driven starting point, then it's much more about new type of companies that are starting in terms of a specific purpose. We're going to make the world, the transportation CO2 free, maybe Tesla, or we're going to start up a steel company which is producing it completely without coke. So the different types of starting point, we can see that from startups now, that the purpose-driven starting point, that we want to do something good for the market, is something that's growing rapidly in terms of new startups, very much purpose-driven. So let me be very brief, but it's a big issue for a lot of companies to be able to take care of this. You know, when it comes to scope 3, for instance, to be able to work with stakeholder dialogue, and in terms of being able to control or to monitor and to report in terms of your entire value chain, which is something that's very tricky to do, as you can see from this picture. You know, you need to be on top of everything from extraction from raw materials and how this is working, to production processes and to consumption processes. So if we're looking at this, the start has been very much in terms of your supply chain, but now it's also coming into your consumption process. This is a big issue. In order to, I mean, we have control of our own production, but now we're supposed to take responsibility outside of our company boundaries, and this is something that we are not really comfortable in doing. I think we try to control our supply chain, which is easier because there are suppliers. The problem is then to also to do it more downstream towards the market and the consumption processes. So what we can see, you know, it's a development for us, and where sustainability is becoming much more core to companies, to the business model. I talked to the sustainability boss for IKEA, for instance, and she said that, and I asked her, I mean, like, it must be fantastic because now sustainability is getting more in your center of your business model. And she said, yeah, it's absolutely like that. So it's very much in the center of the business model. You have to look at what is your value offering, what is your value creation, how is that being done, and how are you thinking about your value sharing. This type of sustainability push towards scope 3 and towards CSD, DDD, it's also blurring boundary of the firms and their business models. And the expanding responsibility in terms of this is something that we also can see in terms of how you need to report. You need to report on also what your business partners are doing. We also see a push that sustainability solution is a way to develop new and novel value offerings. And the last part is basically that we've had a situation where there's been a lot of focus on supply chains, but now it's also more downstream responsibility. And we can see that in H&M, for the Swedish company H&M, which have got problems with the downstream responsibility, whereas they have been working intensively in terms of their upstream supply base. So my final slide. So I was asked to talk about some of the views in terms of this, in terms of the new legislation, the new directives, and from corporation answer is, but it's a bit divided. It's both good, but it's also potentially a bit problematic. And I would love to hear your view on this as well. You know, they are really good. These directives are really good, but because first, and this is something that companies and businessmen and politicians, etc., have been talking about for quite some time, it provides companies with a level playing field. So it's equal for all companies. And that is something that a lot of CEOs and a lot of chairmen of the board have been talking about. We need to have something. We can't do it on our own if it's costly. It needs to be across the board. So the level playing field is something that's hugely important. That's something that companies particularly have been striving for. It also puts sustainability at the center stage for companies' business models. It's also something that's put it in the center for the board of directors. They need to be involved. When we're talking about CSRD, the board of directors need to sign this. And this is something that will ultimately make the sustainability reporting and the issues about that even more important. According to the EU as well, or according to the EU, it will end greenwashing. I'm not so certain about that because there's always, there's always gray areas, but it will end a large portion of greenwashing, definitely. So this has been a long-awaited action from politicians. The problematic issues that we can see, and especially just right now, and that's one thing that this could turn a sustainability focus towards compliance, to be able to do the right thing in your reporting instead of making the company more sustainable. And this ultimately will build a huge sustainability consultant market for reporting, to be able for lawyers, etc., to be able to understand this type of directives, but also to report it in a specific way. And that, for me, is not, because this is something that should be owned by the companies and not by a consultant framework. I talked to, I think it was PwC or someone else, I can't remember who it was, and they said 35% of their employees are now in sustainability. And they are basically an accountant firm. So they are developing this type of skills and going into companies to do that. Another issue is that CSRD will trickle down to smaller companies. So when we're talking about it, that this should be excluded from small companies, we also see that this will trickle down to them, and they need to be able to do this as well, because the larger companies, when it comes to due diligence in the supply chain, they will put demands on their smaller companies, because all these small companies have got predominantly larger customers. So it will definitely be something that need to be a lookout for, because these small companies don't have the resources to do this, in terms of doing reporting and finding data, etc. And the final one is geopolitics. This could also potentially create global trade barriers for other parts of the world towards the EU, that EU is building a tower. And there is also a discussion there in terms from academics that it's about neocolonialism, that basically we are putting on, European values on Eastern countries or on Africa or etc. And it will incur a cost for a lot of these companies. And particularly if you look at some other countries who are not having any requirements on sustainability whatsoever. So that's geopolitics is a real issue here as well. Okay, this was my last slide. I'm very sorry that maybe I took up more of your time, but this is the view a bit from I'm not saying that I'm talking for all Swedish companies, but this is some of the issues that's being raised in Sweden, at least.
Jakob, thank you very much. It was extremely interesting, and I think that there should be a lot of questions. So dear guests, dear participants, please write your questions. So just raise your hands and you could ask the question. There was one question about quite small number of sustainability reports. What do you think about this?
Oh, what I meant was basically 2% of they are not preparing. They are working on sustainability reports as it is, but they feel prepared for the new legislation coming in terms of sustainability reporting. So it's basically not that they are not doing sustainability reporting. It's just a matter of they feel uncertain about the new legislation that's coming in from the EU, because there's so many abbreviations, etc., and they feel a bit uncertain about that. So it's not 2% of companies. I think that when it comes to Sweden, it's GRI is, I think I talked to one of the guys from GRI and he said, is it 80-90% who's using GRI or something like that? So there's a lot of sustainability reports. So sorry for being unclear.
That's okay. I talked to American companies, and actually American companies think that the first year of compliance to the sustainability directive will cost them around $750,000. what do you think about this? Because one of the mantra of European Commission is about lowering, decreasing the cost for sustainability report preparation. But I think it's a quite huge amount of costs. And the second thing, which you already stated quite correctly, it's about big market of the consultants, because now in this new directive, audit is mandatory.
Yeah. So yes, so it's basically it is a legislation that's very much giving a lot of money to accountant firms, both in terms of preparing the reports but also doing the revision.
Who lobbied this?
We should be auditors, all of us, right?
Yeah.
But I think still it's there's always a question about that, because it's, you know, it's really good intentions and it's really good ambition. So I think it's a really good type of framework, and it's quite good that we have the level playing field in terms of this. But there are definitely, when you do this type with really good intentions, there are also the possibility of making it more costly, and it's basically also and turning it into a compliance issue. And this is something I think that one thing that I talked to a lawyer that I know who is also in research, and one of the thing about that is that you have to look, when you're doing this, you have to look at what is the intention of the lawmakers, instead of following the directives extremely close to what it says. You need to look at what is the ambition and then work on the ambition instead of doing it the other way around, because then it becomes compliance instead of looking at what are we going for the goals that the EU has. I think that that's much more important than to follow the directives in detail. Do you see what I mean? So I think
I think that I got what you meant, because last CSR breakfast we talked about trends in sustainability, and we talked about Green Deal and about all issues which European Commission and all plans and ambitions and intentions of European Commission. And in my view, European Commission is quite consistent in terms of what they are doing now. What do you think?
Yes, I think that it's much more consistent. I think it also has to do with a bit of power shift since Brexit as well, that Germany and France has got a higher say in things. And I mean, like, and that could be a good thing, because it's more consistent, and it's basically they're moving forward instead of just standing still. But in terms of that, that's also something that's happening where you can have, because of different countries' types of quirks, it could become more bureaucratic. It could be because some countries are a bit more bureaucratic than others. So it's there's always but I think that you're absolutely right. It's and you know, you can't disagree. It's, you know, the Green Deal is a good thing, and it's human rights and environmental due diligence. It's correct, but we have to look at the ambitions and the intentions of the lawmakers rather than following the letter of the law, I think.
That's true. Jakob, you started with GRI standard, and it's true, it's now the most applicable standard in terms of reporting. And now European Commission is developing European sustainability reporting standard. And what are thoughts and ideas of Swedish companies about this? Because I remember that you had a roundtable about reporting standards, and companies complained about this, but all the time companies complained about different standards. By the way, you know that just recently international sustainability, new international sustainability standards, new version were approved. So what are thoughts of Swedish companies about this European sustainability reporting standard?
It is something that's quite uncertain. This is something that I think it's in July they're going to have a new decision. The decision process in the EU is quite opaque. It's quite difficult to understand, actually. So it goes through so many phases, and then it goes to member states, and then it goes back, and it's Parliament, it's the Council. So for me, I'm not in politics, so it's quite tricky to understand it. But I think for companies, the ESRS is basically something that the companies, and I think that the legislators don't know about this even. GRI is not giving a clear-cut answer in terms of we continue to use GRI and it's compliant with SCRS. So it's still up in the air, so to say. So I would say and this is also a reason why we're talking about 2% of companies feel confident in terms of this, because we don't really know yet.
Okay.
And the legislation is coming in effect quite soon.
Okay, so quite soon there will be some more certainty about what they are going to develop. My last, but okay, Sergey, you have your question, please. You're welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, but no problem. I may ask later. Thank you very much for invitation and such great presentation. A lot of information, I would like to ask: is there any? Because it seems to me that for public governmental companies, bodies, organization in Sweden, they have an obligation to prepare a report. But is there any obligations for private company, public companies? Maybe it's according to the number of employees, or it's just on voluntary basis?
Yes,
so
no,
which companies are? Thank you.
Yes, it's a very good question, and based on, as I said, GRI was basically that a government minister said that the government-owned companies should do according to GRI. But short after that, we also had the legislation having a more far, with the non-financial reporting directive. But in Sweden, we had more stringent legislation in terms of sustainability reporting than there is in the EU. So they have to do a sustainability report. So it's basically one of the things that they're talking about is that, is it better to go further than the legislation is on the EU level, on the national basis, because then you're prepared for the next step. Some people are saying that, because we've had that legislation, it's easier for us to go into the next step when it comes to the CSRD. Whether or not that's true or not, that remains to be seen. But still, so the companies have made their sustainability reports, and it has been in the legislation for quite some time. So very good question.
Thank you, Jakob. Olena Wróblewska.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to express my thanks to Jakob for your absolutely clear and very good presentation. And thank you, the organizers of this event, devoted to this very topical issue. I represent Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. I'm university teacher, associate professor, and I monitor this process of developing reporting in the European Union and all this process of implementation of European Green Deal. What I would like to ask Jakob is, you noted that there is a challenge again about consultant markets. Yeah, so I anticipate that there will be great need in competence in skills and the knowledges of our graduates, university graduates. What do you think? How should we share this knowledge? Should this knowledge about the processes which are going on be shared in more active way, not only via such a limited web events or other events organized by the European Union. You represent university. Do you implement this knowledge into your current curricula? What I mean is that as a university teacher, I try to catch all these trends and to give it to my students. But this is personal initiative, and it's not sufficient to prepare a cohort of specialists, of graduates in universities who would be skilled enough with this knowledge. Thank you.
It is a very good question, and it's also a matter of, I mean, like, I try to do the same, but there's nothing, you know, in terms of the program or the university that has that type of thinking. And one of the issues here as well is that, you know, there is one thing about the EU legislation and directives from an EU perspective, but then you need to put that into, you know, your national legislation. So that's also the next step. How are you supposed to make that into your own national legislation? So I think that what I would say with that is basically some people are actually waiting for the legislation to come into effect on a national level, because then we know what it says. Before that, it's still pending, so to say. But it's a very good question, and it's also a matter of, I see this when it comes to sustainability in terms of competence. It is such a big field, and it's so complex.
Yeah.
So it can't be in one person. It can't be in a sustainability boss. It can't be in one consultant. It's a big ecosystem of different skill sets and different knowledge sets, and how you're supposed to understand. You know, it's a big difference between human rights and CO2 emissions. So it's I don't have a clear-cut answer, but apart from we have to work together, and I think we have to look at this as stakeholder dialogues, and we have to look at this in terms of a bigger ecosystem, really.
Jakob, thank you for being transparent and honest with us. Do you have still questions? Because we do you have still time? Because we have some questions. Okay, thank you, Maria Nesterova.
Thank you very much for the possibility to join your event. Thanks a lot.
Maria, we can't Maria, there is something with your internet connection, so perhaps you could switch off your video and try to just tell.
Yes, thank you very much. I would just like to say a lot of thanks to Jakob because of his very condensed presentation, not only excellent. Each table could be a topic of a separate discussion. And I would like to follow the question which Elena asked you, because
please continue.
Oh, okay, next time. Okay, I will try to write in the chat. I already switched off.
Yeah,
Thank you.
No, we didn't hear you, so there is something with connection. Please write your question, and I will.
Yes, I will.
Jakob, and the last but not least question from me, and then I would like to ask everybody after your reply to turn on your video, your cameras, and we will make photo together, just to have this good memory from today's event. Jakob, just imagine that you are in front of Swedish companies. I think this is the case you have so many times during latest weeks. What are your recommendations for Swedish companies in light of this new sustainability landscape?
My advice to companies is to really think through your own business models when it comes to sustainability. Look at where you are and what type of ambitions you have, because what I see is basically if we only follow directives and become compliant, we will never be in front of the issue. So it's basically, you need to understand what is your value offering and how are you working on that? Is there something we can do about this in terms of making it better? Look at how you're creating your value, look at what your production resources are, look at your suppliers, what are they doing, and look at how you're actually sharing your value between different actors. And if you're on top of that, I think in terms of reporting what you're doing is much easier, because then you know what your ambitions, and you also know what the important aspects are in terms of what's referred to as the materiality, what's the most important aspect that you need to report about. So the reporting should just reflect what you're doing rather than the opposite, to be compliant. So I think that's my advice, is not to stop and just be compliant, work on your sustainability. I think that that's the most important aspect.
Thank you very much. And please, dear participants, turn on your video just to make a photo, and we will send it to Jakob. And you could post it on, and we could post it on our LinkedIn. And actually, Jakob, it was a great pleasure to have you with us today. And thank you for your fantastic presentation and for giving us this overview, but also giving overview not only about landscape, but what companies are thinking and what they are doing. And thank you for your recommendations. I think they are, at first, they are quite clear, but they are very deep, and they will take quite intensive work within the companies. Thank you. And please, let's take photo. Natalia, could we? I also try, but let's do it together. So please turn on your videos, cameras, sorry. So I took two. And Natalia took two. Okay, thank you very much, Jakob. And it was great pleasure. You could decide whether you would like to stay for us later, or I know that we talked about just 30 minutes, but I think that it's great that you were with us just for an hour. Just imagine, because each topic is very interesting and very important. And also for us, it's very important as well as for Swedish companies, because our companies also think about sustainability and they are doing amazing work. It's just what I think.
And it's very much been a pleasure and an honor to be with you this morning. So I'm really, in support of CSR Ukraine and support of Ukraine as well, that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Dear participants, and we could continue, and actually Jakob asked quite important, not even question, he said quite important statement, whether this new directives compliance or sustainability. And I would like just you to vote in our chat. So if you think that these new directives will be more about compliance, please put 1. If you think that it's more about sustainability, please put 2. And for me, it's interesting what you think about this. So 1 is compliance, 2 is sustainability. So what are these directives about? Please be honest, be fair with us. And I see one, so one. So a majority, more people are for compliance. Okay, so please, if you haven't voted yet, please put your number. 1 for compliance, 2 for sustainability. Okay, so up to now, by the way, I see some people put 2, and these people are from business, so they believe that such kind of directives are for the value of sustainability and for idea of sustainability. But you see the majority of our participants think that this new landscape and directives are for compliance. Thank you. And actually, today I also wanted to talk about these two directives, and Jakob explained them quite fantastic. But just perhaps because we didn't talk about them quite much during our breakfast, so that's why I wanted to show more things about this. And actually I think that the key message, my key message, will be the same as Jakob's one, because we need to think and we need to get prepared for this, because it's important. So it's about breakfast, and and I hope that you still have your coffee with you, or a tea, so a cup of coffee or tea. So if you can, please show us, just to be on this breakfast mood. Could somebody show us your cup of coffee or tea? Oh yes, great, fantastic. I'm after the train, so I'm still waiting for my breakfast, but what is important, that it's what we discussed with Jakob, that these directives are part of this consistent policy of European Commission. And actually, it's not only about Green Deal, it's about taxonomy, it's about sustainable finance disclosure regulation, but everything is under, in my view, under the EU Green Deal, EU strategic plan by 2030 and by 2050 to be carbon neutral. And we talked about this last CSR breakfast. Also, there will be some changes in the directive in terms of accounting, transparency, audit, and others. But there are some difference with non-financial reporting, because for non-financial reporting, disclosure reporting, it was around 11 companies were covered, 11,500 companies. Now it's around 50,000 companies which will be covered by this sustainability reporting directive. So you see that it's a huge step forward. Also, I have already told that American companies think that in terms of compliance, it will cost them $750,000 for the first year of compliance. And actually, you could see that it's not only for EU companies, it's also for non-EU companies, especially if companies have some businesses in EU. And there are some Ukrainian companies which are there. And there are Ukrainian companies who have already prepared reports on non-financial reporting directives. So they will be obliged to report according to this directive as well. And also, I think it's also a huge step forward, because it's also about SMEs. But in terms of SMEs, there will be quite limited set of requirements. So there will be some incentives for SMEs, now new reporting requirements, and there will be some simplified standards. Perhaps, and you have already heard, there is some kind of uncertainty about this European sustainability standard, but perhaps there will be some simplified standard for SMEs. And you could see the difference. So it's about non-financial reporting directive, what companies should report on, and what they should report according to new corporate sustainability reporting directives. And I think that this issue which Jakob mentioned about double materiality, it's quite interesting, because in according to KPMG, it's a kind of challenge for companies now, because they haven't done this before. And also, if you look at non-financial reporting directive, we know that in Ukraine it was harmonized in report on corporate governance, corporate management. Sorry, and actually it was just tick exercise. And it was not about sustainability. It was more about compliance. But now these reports have been stopped due to full-fledged invasion. What is also quite interesting in terms of corporate sustainability reporting directive, it's about annual ESG targets and reporting on the progress. I think it's also quite interesting thing, which should be incorporated, and it's about measuring, and this is quite good. And we have already talked about the role of auditors. It's new requirements. It has been already discussed by Jakob, and it's about materiality assessment, it's about new business model, it's about new targets, it's about role of the management and supervisory board, it's about new policies, processes, it's about adverse impacts and actions to prevent, mitigate, and it's about risks, sustainability risks, and then taking into account the new directive on due diligence, it's about human rights and environmental risks and their management. So it's quite interesting one, and I think it's quite complex requirement as well. By the way, if we looked at a non-financial reporting directive, which are in place still. Many companies think that they lack information for this. So it's more about compliance now. And actually, the companies who prepared their reports, sustainability reports, they, in my view, for this non-financial reporting directive, it didn't take them too much time to get prepared for non-financial reporting directive because they have already reported on this. In terms of this new directive on corporate sustainability reporting, it will take more time for them to get prepared because there are some new things, including measurement, including targets. Not many companies actually set targets, ESG targets, so it will be quite a lot of work. So what are key things? Also, it's about concept of double materiality. It's about unique location where companies should publish their reports. This is also quite interesting because for me, it's a kind of GRI thing or in line with GRI, because if you prepare the report according to GRI, you could publish it on GRI website. And also it's about auditing. And actually there are two types of auditor's verification. It's about limited and reasonable, and European Commission is expected that by 2028 all companies will have reasonable assurance. What else? It's about European sustainability reporting standards. We already know that there is no certainty about this, but there are some plans, and in terms of plans, that there will be also some universal norms, and they will be ready quite soon. So perhaps we'll have more certainty, but also there will be some sector-specific norms, and they will be ready by the mid of next year. And also there will be some specific norms for listed SMEs. So what I already mentioned, that there will be some simplified procedure for SMEs. And this is how they plan. It's on their website, so you see that they opened their feedback process already, so you could read. And this is 4 weeks, so we could also read it and perhaps understand to have more certainty about this. In terms of corporate sustainability reporting directive, Jakob already mentioned that there will be 3 periods. First, it's for the reports of 2024 for big companies, then 2025, and then for listed SMEs, it's 2026. Actually, there are some time to get prepared, but if it's not about your company, and actually up to now, some Ukrainian companies could ask the same question, why do we care about this? Why should we care? And there are some important expectation that such kind of directive will increase the number of requests for sustainability information from many, many stakeholders, including banks, suppliers, partners, media, consumers, and young people. And because nowadays there is a very big competition for young talents, I think it's also quite important. So what you should do if CSRD doesn't apply to your company, you should start it on a voluntary base. And in terms of KPMG, they found out 8 challenges and opportunities. So first is double materiality. The second is targets, because you remember companies should set targets. It's vastness of information, because there should be forward-looking information, but also retrospective information. It's linked with the European taxonomy, so you should read it, you should understand it. It's mandatory assurance, it's reporting in the management report, so it means that the management report should be restructured. It's alignment with TCFD requirements, and not all companies reported to TCFD. And it's embedding sustainability knowledge within the organization, so it will take a lot of work, even for companies who have already reported. And the new directive just have been adopted by European Parliament. It's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It happened on the 1st of July. So it means that there will be due diligence and responsibility for management for human rights abuses and environmental harm throughout global value chains, and companies should formulate and comply with a transition plan aimed at curbing global warming to 1.5 degrees. And I think it's quite interesting and it's quite important now, because everybody is talking about climate change, and you see that European companies, that it covers not only European companies but also non-European companies and their supply chain. And key elements of this directive is first, supply compliance and due diligence, climate transition plans, and compensation, because companies with more than 1,000 employees might tie their directors' compensation to the achievement of milestone. And it's just as a requirement of what companies should do: conduct due diligence, mitigate risks, report publicly. They could prepare the sustainability reports, or just put the report for CSDD on their website and establish grievance mechanism. And it's very interesting because we have analyzed Ukrainian companies. Not all companies have a CSD requirement. In terms of sanctions and incentives, I think it's important that first of all, there will be some fines, there will be some sanctions at the country level, because member states would designate an authority to supervise, and then at European level there will be established network of supervisory authorities, just to have the more or less unified approach to all countries. The second is civil liability. It means that victims could access for compensation and financial incentives, but also fines. And the fine and key important things here are about 5% of the company's net world value turnover, or in certain circumstances, abandoned public procurement within the EU. So, and also what is very important, that this directive is aimed at the consequences of COVID. If you remember COVID, a lot of companies faced disruption of their supply chains. So that's why regulators decided to set the frame for business continuity. So it means that the companies should identify their key suppliers, also develop contingency plan for them, for themselves, and regularly review these continuity processes. And actually what we have found in Ukraine, quite soon in the page media, there should be results of our CSR index. And we have found that there are some companies who already asked their suppliers to prepare business continuity plans. So what Ukrainian companies could do, and it's, you remember my last but not least question to Jakob, and this is just my recommendations, not only mine, but from European experts' recommendations. First, companies should prepare gap analysis in terms of their sustainability reporting, in terms of their sustainability model, and sustainability reporting in terms of their due diligence model. Also, companies should follow ESRC rules. It's European standards on sustainability reporting and also on due diligence systems. Also, companies should understand who will be responsible for these processes in terms of sustainability reporting and due diligence, and also it's not only about responsibilities, but also who could be a part of such kind of working group. Also, companies should understand what they have in the company, but what kind of outside resources they need in terms of, for example, consultant, or for example, e-platform, etc. So they should budget it, and I think this is very important. And this is what CSR Ukraine could do. It's about collaboration with an industry to understand the best practices and to adapt them. So that's what we could do, and help companies to get prepared to all changes in European environment, sustainability reporting environment. Any questions? I see one question about presentations. Actually, at our CSR breakfast, we have the rule we do not send presentation. But Jakob, if it's up to you. But our rules, we prefer not to send it, but just to discuss it, to understand, etc.
I'm happy to send it, but I don't have the email addresses. So.
We will do it. Don't worry. Yeah. Any questions? Any recommendations to Ukrainian companies or non-EU companies? What do you think? What first key things non-EU companies, including Ukrainian companies, could do in the light of these new sustainability directives? What do you think? Oksana, are you with us? Yulia, I see you. Julia, I see you are with us, and perhaps Oksana with us. You're from companies, and perhaps you could tell your own ideas on first three steps, actions.
Hello, everybody. I'm Julia from Bayer Company. So as for the question which was mentioned by Maryna, so it's quite difficult to say because as we are the part of the global company which is working in all around the world in up to 80 countries all over the world, so it's quite difficult because we up to the control of the local local government, local rules, and as well we obey to our global company.
Okay, because Julia, you represent Bayer, and it's global company, so you have the branch. In my view, we should do something more in terms of making a kind of transition from compliance to sustainability. Because up to now, our report on corporate, як він називається в нас, звіт
Фінансовий звіт, non-financial.
We have non-financial reporting directive was harmonized in Ukraine, and it's called management report. It's called management report in Ukraine, and it's a completely compliance exercise made by financial people, not sustainability managers. So I think
not really, because here actually I would like to say that we provide some information from our sustainability projects or corporate social projects, and so here we go in partner with our financial managers. However, it's not the same as is doing when people prepare reports, these great sustainable reports, because I'm talking about our company, because this is headquarter who prepares this one big non-financial report, where our part, I mean part of Ukraine, is just a little piece of all the picture.
Just one moment. Natalia, could you take the lead?
Yeah, so maybe someone else have questions or want to take the floor to share experience.
Sergey, you had a recommendation for students?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, generally, I know I'm used to work for Simon Kuznets Economic University in Kharkiv, and we have such subject, social responsibility. And what is my insight, or how we involve my students? They choose company by themselves. Usually it's two students group working, or maybe individually, and they present during the course the issues from that company. And due to this, we have, for example, in group is 18 to 25 students, at least 8 to 10 good examples, and they exchange. So in our company, which means, for example, like Microsoft or Apple or Novo Nordisk, we have this for these issues with employees. In other company, another, and till the end of semester, they have a very wide understanding which company may present for employees. And I thought, unfortunately, first time that this subject was at the last year of bachelor studies, and it moved to third year. Now it moved to second year. But in any case, I said, dear students, in few months, few years, you will go to company, and now you know what you may ask and for which benefits for employees, even now, even in our situation now in Ukraine. And I'm very grateful that we may invite representatives of companies, or due to these roundtables, to exchange this idea, and invite specialists from companies to share this experience.
Perfect, thank you. So to create more demands from students regarding sustainability of the companies, it's fantastic. I also thought that, Yulia, after our conversation, I think that we still need to think about proper harmonization of European directives, not to make them just compliance things. And we have already recommendations for companies from my presentation, and we have already for education. If you have other, okay. Thank you very much. It was our, Natalia, it was third or fourth, our CSR breakfast?
It is third, the third one.
Perfect. So it's our third CSR breakfast, first time online, but I think it was fantastic because we could travel to Sweden and to see what companies do there. And actually next month, we are going to have 2 breakfasts, I hope. First will be offline. It will be about business and human rights. We will talk about, again, the directive and about new OECD standard for responsible behavior. And in the end of the month, we will talk about corporate trends in corporate volunteering. And in August, we are going to talk again about sustainability trends with the participation of American experts. Yes, Jakob, you are welcome.
I would just like to say that I'm really honored to have been with you this morning. But I also wanted to also say that there is very big opportunity when it comes to the Green Deal, and there's so much funds coming out of the EU. They are forecasting at least 1 trillion euros for this. So it's basically if as a company, as a researcher or something like that, or even government are following this type of, the Green Deal and thinking about that in terms of that, there's also a lot of opportunities to raise funds. And I think that, as you know, with your situation in the Ukraine, I think there's a huge opportunity also for you in Ukraine in terms of this.
Thank you for pointing this. I think it's very important, and actually it's a great opportunity for educational institutions as well, and also for business associations, because a lot of Ukrainian companies ask me what and how they should do. And I think that such kind of consultancy for them with EU funds will be very, very useful. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to be with you on this Constitution Day. And Jakob, thank you for your presentation, and it was fantastic. And thank you for your support.